In August of 1921, private planes flew over a mountain in West Virginia and dropped bombs on 10,000 American citizens, not in a war zone, not on foreign soil, in Logan County, West Virginia, on coal miners, fathers, sons, World War I veterans who had come home from defending this country only to be told they had no right to organize. And then, for the next 100 years, almost every American history textbook left this story out entirely. To understand what happened on that mountain, you need to understand the system that pushed 10,000 men to pick up rifles. You need to understand the companytown. In the coalfields of southern West Virginia, the mining company did not just employ you, it owned you. The company owned your house, it owned the store where you bought your food, it owned the doctor who treated your children. In some camps, it owned the church where you prayed on Sunday. And here is a detail that still disturbs me. Many miners were not paid in United States currency. They were paid in scrip, metal tokens or paper slips printed by the company, redeemable only at the company store. The prices at that store were set by the company. If bread cost 10 cents in the next town, it might cost 25 cents at the company store. You could not spend your scrip anywhere else. You could not save it. You could not leave because you owed the store more than you earned. They had a phrase for it. I owe my soul to the company store. That was not a metaphor. That was a financial description. If you tried to organize a union, they fired you. If you were fired, you were evicted from company housing. If you were evicted, Baldwin Felts detectives, private security agents, would come to your home, remove your furniture, and set it in the road, in the rain, with your family standing there. These were not isolated incidents. This was the operating procedure. Across the coalfields, entire communities lived under corporate feudalism. No elected officials represented them. The county sheriffs were on the coal company payroll. The judges were appointed by men who answered to the operators. On May 19, 2020, 13 Baldwin Felts agents arrived in the town of Matewan. They had come to evict union miners and their families from company housing. They carried out the evictions, furniture in the mud, children crying, the usual procedure. But Matewan had something most coal towns did not, a police chief who was not on the company payroll. His name was Sid Hatfield. He was 27 years old, slight, sharp-eyed, and completely unintimidated by the Baldwin Felts men. Hatfield confronted the lead detective, Albert Felts, on the street. He told them they had no legal authority to carry out evictions in his town. Felts produced a warrant for Hatfield's arrest. The mayor of Matewan, Cable Testerman, examined the warrant and declared it fraudulent. What happened next took less than 90 seconds. A gunfight erupted on the streets of Matewan. When it ended, 10 men were dead. 7 of them were Baldwin Felts agents, including Albert Felts and his brother Lee. Mayor Testerman was killed. 2 miners were killed. Sid Hatfield survived. He was charged with murder. He was acquitted, and overnight he became the most famous man in the West Virginia coalfields. Miners called him Smilin' Sid. He was proof that the company men could be beaten, that if one man stood up, the whole system could shake. Within weeks, 90% of the miners in Mingo County had pledged to the union. The coal operators understood what Hatfield represented, and they decided he could not be allowed to continue representing it. On August 1, 1921, Sid Hatfield and his friend Ed Chambers walked unarmed up the steps of the McDowell County Courthouse in Welch, West Virginia. They were there to answer unrelated charges. They were not expecting trouble. They should have been. Baldwin Felts agents were waiting on the courthouse steps. They shot Hatfield and Chambers on the spot. Hatfield was hit multiple times and died on the stairs. Chambers fell, and witnesses reported that a detective walked over and fired into his body as he lay on the ground. His wife, Sally Chambers, watched from feet away. None of the agents were ever convicted. They claimed self-defense. The bullet holes from the shooting are reportedly still visible in the stone of those courthouse steps today. The assassination was not just a murder, it was a message. The message was clear. Even your heroes are not safe. Even the law cannot protect you. If we want you dead, "You will die on the steps of justice itself." That message was received, but not the way the coal operators intended. Within days, miners began gathering. First hundreds, then thousands. They assembled at Lenz Creek Mountain in Kanawha County near Marmot. Armed men arrived from every hollow and coal camp in the region. By August 20th, the gathering had grown to an estimated 13,000 men. I need you to hold a detail in your mind here. Many of these men were World War I veterans. They organized themselves with military discipline. They had supply lines. They had medical units. They had passwords and sentries. These were not a mob. They were an army assembled from the working poor of Appalachia, and they were not all white. This is a detail that the few textbooks that mention Blair Mountain tend to skip. The miners' army included black miners, Italian immigrants, Hungarian immigrants, men who, in every other context in 1921 America, would have been separated by the color line. In the coal fields, they fought together. They marched together. They wore the same symbol, a red bandana, tied around the neck. That is where the word comes from, redneck. Before it was an insult about class or geography, it was a badge of solidarity. The rednecks of Blair Mountain were a racially integrated army of working people who fought the richest corporations in America with borrowed rifles and red cloth around their necks. The coal operators knew the miners were coming. Logan County Sheriff Don Chafin, bankrolled directly by the coal companies, assembled a force of roughly 3,000 men, deputies, strikebreakers, and private guards, and positioned them along the ridgeline of Blair Mountain. They had the high ground, they had machine guns, and they had something the miners did not expect: aircraft. The Battle of Blair Mountain began on August 29, 1921, and lasted 5 days. On one side, 10,000 miners with hunting rifles, a few Gatling guns looted from a company store, and nothing resembling air defense. On the other, 3,000 company men dug into fortified positions on the high ground, backed by machine guns and private planes. The planes dropped homemade bombs on the miners' positions, explosive devices. Reports describe fragmentation bombs and gas bombs. Some accounts specify leftover ordnance from the First World War. This was aerial bombardment of American citizens on American soil, carried out not by a foreign enemy, but by private aircraft hired by a county sheriff. The fighting spread across a front roughly 10 miles wide. The miners advanced up the mountain under fire, taking casualties but continuing to push forward. For 5 days, the hollows of Logan County sounded like the Western Front. And here is the part that I keep returning to. The United States government did intervene. President Warren Harding issued an executive order. The army arrived by September 2nd with roughly 2,100 troops. Air Service reconnaissance planes flew over the battlefield. But the army did not come to stop the bombing. It did not come to arrest Sheriff Chafin or the coal operators. It came to stop the miners. The federal government sent its military to put down working people who were being bombed. When the army arrived, the miners laid down their weapons. Many surrendered voluntarily. They had fought a war overseas under the American flag, and they would not fire on American soldiers. Roughly 1,000 men turned themselves in to the army. The rest melted back into the mountains and went home. The battle was over, but what came next was worse. Now, I need to be fair. Sheriff Chafin and the coal operators were facing a genuine armed insurrection. 10,000 men marching with rifles into a county is an extraordinary threat to public order. The governor had the authority to request federal intervention. The army had the legal mandate to restore peace, and many of the miners had commandeered trains and seized supplies, actions that are criminal. If you are committed to the rule of law, you can make a case that the miners were in the wrong. I will grant all of that. But the question I cannot let go of is not whether the miners broke the law. The question is what happened to anyone on the other side. What happened to the men who bombed American citizens from the air? What happened to the sheriff who was on the coal company payroll? What happened to the operators who ran a feudal system? The answer is nothing. After the battle, 985 miners were indicted. The charges included murder, conspiracy, and treason against the state of West Virginia. Treason. The men who fought because they wanted a union were charged with betraying their own state. The treason trials lasted years. Bill Blizzard, one of the march organizers, was among those charged. He was eventually acquitted, as were most of the defendants, but the legal battle bankrupted the UMWA's organizing efforts for a decade or more. Union membership in the state collapsed. The operators had lost the battle, but won the war. And then the erasure began. The coal companies did not just defeat the miners, they removed them from memory. Newspapers that had reported sympathetically for the miners were shut down. Editors were arrested. News dispatches describing poverty in mining towns were censored before they could be transmitted. The mine owners, who wielded enormous political influence, shaped the textbooks that would be used in the state's public schools for generations. The Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest armed insurrection since the Civil War, the only time private planes bombed American citizens on domestic soil, a 5-day war involving 13,000 people, was not taught. Not in West Virginia schools, not in American history classes nationwide. For nearly 80 years, the most significant labor uprising existed in a gap. And when the story finally began to surface, when historians fought to have the battlefield recognized, in 2009, Blair Mountain was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Then, in 2018, a mountaintop removal mining permit threatened to destroy the battlefield itself. A coal company wanted to strip mine the mountain where miners had fought and died for the right to organize against coal companies. The circle could not be more complete. They fought the company on that mountain. The company erased it from history, and then the company came back to erase the mountain itself. If you have been following this channel, you recognize the architecture, a population that threatens the interests of concentrated power, an event so violent it cannot be denied, only buried, a legal system that punishes the victims and acquits the perpetrators, a media apparatus that sanitizes the record, and an education system that carries the silence forward generation after generation. Blair Mountain is not separate from the boarding schools. It is not separate from the orphan trains. They are all the same operation. Different targets, different decades, the same result. A population that cannot tell its own story because the institutions that should have preserved it chose to destroy it instead. I want to leave you with something one of the miners said. "We ain't asking for charity, we're just asking for a chance to buy our bread with real money and bury our dead with their real names." 10,000 men marched for that. They were bombed for it, they were charged with treason for it, and then they were erased. The question is not whether it happened. The question is who decided it should be forgotten, and whether the same people are still making that decision today.